Hello, Tom. Welcome to the show. Thrilled to have you on today.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So, generative AI is all the buzz, but you started writing this book in 2022 before OpenAI released ChatGPT and thrust generative AI on the landscape for everybody and layman alike. What got you started on writing this book? Why did you decide to write this book in 2022?
Well, I wrote a book in 2019 called AI Basics. So this is an area I've been looking at for quite some time. And so, I try to follow the latest developments. And then, after I wrote that book came, the GPT-3 and these large language models. They didn't get a lot of attention. But for those kind of like myself in the industry, uh, you know, they were something I was paying attention to. And um, and then I saw in 2022 that it seemed like it was really picking up some momentum. Sequoia and some big tier one VCs were investing in these types of companies. There was a very prophetic piece written by Sequoia about it. And then, there were some breakout companies we were seeing, like Jasper, that were growing at breakneck speed, that looked very interesting. And, were raising, a lot of money. And it seemed like they were solving some real problems as well. So that came onto my radar screen, and I was looking to write another book. And then kind of the irony here is that my publisher was, they quite they're kind of scratching their head at this, and then but they went ahead. They went ahead with it, and this was before ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT came out, and then it was off to the races, and they thought, oh, that's a great idea. But I had no clue that, obviously no one really had any idea that this would happen, but it did. And, sometimes, uh, you know, sometimes showing up is half the battle.
That's a really good timing. And it's not the first time that you've timed it well when you sold one of your earlier startups in the height of the dot-com boom in 1999, I believe. So we will get to that part of your journey as well. But uh, I'm going to call you next time I'm buying lottery tickets. Sounds like
Okay.
you've got that good luck. So you started writing the book in 2022, and uh, OpenAI released ChatGPT, and just a tidal wave occurred in terms of adoption and just the um, insertion of AI into the zeitgeist, and everybody's talking about it. How did you kind of keep up as you were writing the book? Things are developing so quickly. Like, how can you send it to publish when every day something new is coming out?
Yeah, you know what it's like drinking out of a fire hose. That's I guess it's like more of like a fire department hose. It's almost impossible. Um, you just do what you can. And I knew so I was writing it. I knew GPT-4 was coming out sometime. I just didn't know when. I didn't want it to be the case that the book comes out and then GPT-4 comes out. So even when it wasn't out, I hinted at it and said that this is the next model, and this apparently it's going to do this and that. But it was fortuitous that it did come out as I was writing the book, so I was able to get that into it. And then some of the, but it was difficult, but but it's fun. And you learn a lot along the way. It forces you to keep track and, keep ahead of things. And I think that's one of the values of writing a book is that, so a lot of times you have to, there's certain things you look at that you would not probably normally look at if you're not writing a book, but you have to because you want it to be a complete picture. So I think it does provide a broader outlook on things. But yeah, it was a challenge, but somehow I got through it. I think, like I said, it was fortunate that I was able to get the GPT-4 in there.
Yeah, I bet. What surprised you most as you were going through your research for the book over the last year?
I think the thing that did surprise me was the this was that real time experience is how early on Google just stumbled. They had a you know hastily put together conference right after Microsoft had its conference, and Microsoft looked like they were completely prepared, and they knew what they were doing. And then Google seemed like they were kind of amateur hour. And then the irony is that as I did a lot of research on this, a lot of the work in generative AI and the innovations have come from Google. So just because you're the innovator doesn't mean you'll commercialize it. And I think that's a big lesson to be taken out of this. Kind of goes back to the 1970s with Xerox PARC. Uh, they they had Ethernet, they had laser printers, they had the graphical user interface, they had PCs, they had everything, mouse, you name it, they had it, all in the 1970s. And somehow, Steve Jobs got invited to go in there, and Bill Gates somehow, I think, got a ticket into there to check things out, and then they were just salivating. In fact, there was so much there they couldn't use all of it. They could only use a part of it, and then they went and made all the money on from the PC revolution, and Xerox pretty much got nothing out of the deal. So I don't think that's going to be the case with Google. And in fact, I'm very impressed of how Google has put things together, and I think it's putting up a good fight now. But I do think that was the surprise, is that Google has been known to be very innovative and quick and nimble, but this time it wasn't, even though it had created a lot of the technologies.
You're absolutely right. The seminal paper on transformer technology did come out of Google, I believe in 2016, 2015. I could be wrong.
2017, attention is all you need.
That's right. And they've been at the forefront of AI, both internally as well as with some of their subsidiaries and investments. So I think it's a classic case of Innovators Dilemma. Google makes a lot of money from search and from search ads specifically. The disruption that this type of chat interface, when it comes to asking questions, a lot of people, myself included, have already shifted many of our searches. The behavior, where would have been first instinct to go and Google something, now it's like, hey, I can get a more robust answer from a chatbot, whether it's ChatGPT or Pi or any other. So how do you see the search landscape specifically changing? Google, they were unprepared in their first initiative, but they've recently rolled out the enhanced search with AI functionality in beta, and they're going to be rolling it out more broadly. I've heard from experts sooner than we expect that it's going to come out. It's going to inevitably change search. It's going to change both their business, but also for marketers and publishers, content producers. It's going to significantly change the landscape. How do you see that playing out over the next couple of years?
Mm-hmm. Well, I do think there is a shift towards, natural language prompting, and also the expectation that content can be created, and not just text, but images, and down the line videos. So there's so many different use cases for that, where a traditional search engine obviously is not going to do any of that for you. So and then the other problem is, as Google implements these systems into its own search engine, that makes for a better experience, but the cost of delivering this technology is so much more expensive than traditional search. So you got to create these supercomputers, the data centers. I mean, it's really multiples more expensive than it is, to doing a single search versus a chat completion prompt chat completion. So so it's not just the potential threat of losing revenue, but also the costs, and that's putting pressure on margins. And at the end of the day, Google's powered by search, and that ingenious model that just throws cash like no one can believe. And then even with these new systems in place, you don't have the links. You can have links, But it's if a lot of that content is created and it's satisfactory, you're not linking off to other sites, so you're losing that revenue opportunity. So maybe there's more like banner ads or something, I don't know, on these, or like what OpenAI has done, where they have a paid version of ChatGPT. Maybe there's a paid version of Bart as a way to help monetize it. Um, so I do think, uh, for it's kind of this uh, you know asynchronous, unconventional warfare that's going on, where uh, Microsoft's an advantage because they're not cannibalizing their business. They can do these experiments, and Google can as well, and they are, but they're going to suffer, both pressures on the cost side, and the revenue side. So it's definitely going to shake things up, and already has. It's such a huge market, and for Microsoft, it's a huge opportunity. The irony is that I think there's a lot of people out there who think Bing is a new product. Uh, they don't know it's been around for a long time. It's just such a minor piece of Microsoft's business. But I suspect it'll be a growing part of Microsoft going forward. And
That's right. And I heard Satya Nadella saying earlier this year that along similar lines that they don't need to beat Google at search, but they're at a point now for the first time where they're making Google tremble, right? From both sides, both with regards to losing market share potentially, as well as in terms of their margins are getting squeezed because the cost of delivering a generative result, the processing cost is significantly so much higher, orders of magnitude higher than what they've enjoyed this monopoly of this super high margin business for a couple decades now. That's really interesting how that's going to change. And it's not just Bing and Microsoft that are in this. There's also companies like Perplexity.ai, you've got you.com that are entering the space. And you've got a couple other heavily funded startups that are trying to build these foundational models. So how do you see the value accruing in this industry from the perspective of startups coming into the space? A lot of them you'd categorize as those that are building on top of the models. You mentioned Jasper earlier, classic case. They built a really valuable niche use case on top of OpenAI's GPT-3. So there's many of those types of startups, and we've had a lot of those on the show. But then you also have the companies that are trying to build the foundational models. Is there defensibility in that? What's the business model there? How do you see that potentially playing out for the startups and for the investors in the space?
well, going out and building a LLM uh, takes a lot of money, obviously. And I think these systems get commoditized over time, because what you're doing again is they create these APIs, and companies build on top of them. So you got this underlying infrastructure, but you know if there's others on the market and they kind of do the same thing, and they're all based on the same concepts, the transformer, the paper, the attention is all you need. Um, it's hard to differentiate at that level. And then the huge costs. So on the infrastructure LLM side, um, you know, that's not a traditional out of your garage startup. It's a heavily funded company with a lot of data scientists and researchers and things like that. And there are different foundation models emerging. Uh, Anthropic is one of them, backed by Google. But and then there's open source systems, which are important too. Taulli from Databricks is one of them. So there's a variety of these open source systems. Um, but the problem is that um, as companies develop on these, there's probably going to be a winners takes most phenomenon. Developers want to go where there's opportunity, and it's just go to Windows. When would I want to build when the iPhone came out? Would I want to build on iOS, or do I want to, if I'm a developer, do I want to build on Windows Phone? Well, we know the answer to that question. It was all iOS and Android. I think something similar will happen with these LLMs and developments, where it'll probably be OpenAI and GPT-4, and because that is definitely the top in the market, and maybe Palm 2, and maybe another one or two. But developers are not going to spend their time and their hard, their brain power on these on platforms that don't really have a lot of mind share out there. So I think the winners are already kind of in line of sight uh, right now. But I think there's a lot of opportunity on the app side. That's probably the longer term opportunity. But there's so many other opportunities. How to create tools for managing data, uh, tracking how these models operate, like ML ops. I mean, there's so many different things and opportunities for startups beyond just building an LLM. So you know, it's probably there's no shortage of things to do uh, for this that companies will need help with.
Picking winners is a tough business, but since we're on the topic, the focus tends to go to um, OpenAI, which is now kind of synonymous with Microsoft because of their significant investment and partnership there, as well as Alphabet and Google. But Meta has the data set, the data science talent, and the capital to also become a significant player. And they did release their, I don't know if it was intentional or leaked, but their what is it, the Llama model or Lambda model?
Yeah, Llama.
The Llama model was released to the public, and even Google in their internal memo said that they're afraid of the um, open architecture or open source model potentially taking on. So do you see Meta and potentially other open source projects taking over where OpenAI or Google maybe have a head start right now?
That's probably the opportunity for Meta is an open platform. It's kind of ironic because they're not usually known for being open. Um, because I do think there's a lot of companies that want control over their LLMs. They don't want to send their data to a third party, or a potential competitor. Apple is, apparently they're building their own LLM, it sounds like. And they've forbidden their developers from using OpenAI systems because they don't want OpenAI to maybe spy on their on what they're up to. So there's a lot of data and privacy concerns. But if it's all open source, then a company can evaluate it and benchmark it, put it in a private cloud, and you could probably get better security and more control over your data. So that's probably the opportunity. I think it'd be tougher for some type of proprietary model for Meta to win this war, because I think again, I think Alphabet and OpenAI slash Microsoft are way ahead at this point.
Yeah. The prediction a while back was that if anybody can build AGI, it's Meta because of the data sets and human training or interactions that train the models inherent in their platform. So I guess it'll be interesting to see how those things play out. What about the use cases? We talked about startups building on top of these models, building more niche kind of product, or I guess the value layer on top of the model where they're specializing in specific use cases. We've had several of those on the podcast. One that pops out to my mind was really cool was Wizard, which creates UI automatically from initially was from sketches, and it can use computer vision to turn that into a user interface. Now they even have a chat interface where you can just tell it, make me an app that does a dating app in the style of Airbnb or whatever, and it'll design it for you. So really cool stuff there, and there's lots of things happening in multimedia, whether it's in video creation, editing, etc. What are some of the cool applications that you've seen over the last 6 months popping up?
Yeah, there's a lot going on. One that I covered in my book is from DeepMind, which is owned by uh, Alphabet. And DeepMind is one of the early players in this AGI movement. And their systems have beat the world champions in Go, the game Go, which everyone, a lot of people thought would never happen. It did happen. So they've used some generative AI technologies for a system called AlphaFold. And what it does is creates 3D representations of just about every protein that exists on the face of the earth. I think it's over 200 million of those. And, when you think about that, apparently there's a lot of proteins that we didn't really know what they look like or what their dimensions are. Now we do, because the system has been able to do that. But what are the potential positive impacts for healthcare, new therapeutics, new treatments, diagnostics? So I do think in healthcare, this technology has a huge amount of potential, and can change people's lives in a very real way. As opposed to something like Snapchat, which is kind of cool. And in fact, I think they're doing some cutting edge things, and they're learning a lot, much more than what Meta is doing. I would say, they stuck their neck out. But I do think that's an interesting example of, a bigger company with a lot of data, where there is risk, but they're taking a risk and they're learning. And it sounds like there's users out there that like this and engage with it, their own AI pal. So that's LangChain has been around for a while, but I do think it's a really compelling technology, because these LLMs are really kind of, they're chat models, but they don't really carry out tasks or processes, at least as they're constructed. So LangChain is a framework that takes an LLM. It doesn't have to be OpenAI. It can be, various LLMs or types of or flavors of OpenAI LLMs. And then you can develop these sophisticated applications with LLMs, where you really couldn't do that using the existing tools from these LLM providers. Because sometimes you want you can create like this auto GPT where it can go out and just kind of figure things out on your behalf. You tell it to do something and it comes up with the steps and actually does it for you. I think that's pretty compelling technology and really interesting use of artificial intelligence. So I do think there's a lot going on. Character AI, I think, is a really interesting application. They raised a huge amount of money recently, but it uses an LLM to simulate a character. It could be a made-up character that you've created. It could be Elon Musk. It could be an alien. It could be someone who died years ago, like Alan Turing. And you can have conversations and interact with that AI character. There's a lot going on.
There's definitely a lot, and every day new ones pop up. What was that? The second to last one you said was LangChain.
LangChain. Lang, Lang chain. It's all one word. LangChain. LangChain.
Oh, I have not heard of them. I'm going to look them up. I'm glad you brought up the protein folding example from DeepMind. It was announced last summer, and I think it didn't get as much press as it should have in terms of its impact, because people, myself included, don't fully understand what it means from a biologic and genetic standpoint of what we can do with it. I think, though, that as a society and perhaps driven by news media, we're focusing a lot on some of the dangers of AI as it relates to whether it's misinformation, spam, job displacement. There's a lot of things that we should be careful about and we should watch out for. And there's certainly reason for caution. But if you take the optimistic view of what AI can empower in terms of longevity research, potentially even, there are those that are predicting that not too far in the future, if you live long enough, you will reach the point of where longevity research outpaces death, where we would turn into not a immortal species, but an amortal species, so that people can still die by accident or by violence, but that disease would be eradicated potentially from advancement. That's a very optimistic view, but there's so many exciting things that AI and these technologies can bring to us. So I'm hopeful. I don't know where you stand on that kind of pessimism or optimism binary. From your book, it seemed like you were pretty hopeful for the future as well.
Yeah, but I do I have a chapter on the future, and I do talk about job loss and societal impact, and that's all. Like you said, it's all there, and those are clear risks. The irony here is that the industry itself seems to be more overly dramatic about this than you would usually see. Talking about the end of humanity and things like that. So I don't that I think that's a little out there. LLMs, are you know even simple technology can do lots of harm. Just because you have a very sophisticated technology doesn't mean you know you know it, it doesn't necessarily mean it magnifies the harm per se. Um, and these technologies are really just a tool for people. Um, I have to prompt an LLM to get it to do something. I mean, I have to basically instruct it to do something. It just doesn't suddenly, take a life of its own and starts creating havoc around the world. Um, so, it creates content. Maybe it is dangerous content, but we've had that problem for a long time anyway. But I do think that there are some things that we got to be careful with, and some of it is like what identity is. Um, you know, there's going to be a time when this type of conversation we may not know if you're real and I'm real, and maybe this is just two AIs talking to each other, and it seems kind of like they're real. They, they say and whatever, and you know, it just seems like a very human experience, and but that can cause some problems too, because if you get a call from somebody and you think that that person is who they say they are, and it really is, that person isn't, then there can be a lot of fraud or scams and things like that. So
And that's already happening.
absolutely.
Microsoft and Meta released their publications around the voice impersonation. It's shocking how little input data they need in order to completely synthesize a person's voice, and scammers are using it to try to elicit money or other access through voice. It's not distant future. It's happening now, and I think we're going to see it probably pretty quickly in terms of media, where we're going to see actors. Probably stage one is for voiceover for internationalization, so you can see a movie within any language that you see it, but not maybe 5-10 years with fully digital AI actors and voice actors, and also the I guess personification, or I don't know what you want to call it, but it's a fully digital actor on screen as well. So that's all happening.
Yeah. And Microsoft has technology that can clone your voice in 3 seconds.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty.
Yeah. Didn't they acquired what was the name of the company that did all of the voice?
There's Nuance.
Nuance, yes, they acquired Nuance, right?
As like $19 billion several years ago.
Yep. So that gave them a head start there. You mentioned what it means for identity. I think that's a really important topic, because one of the potential scenarios where we move towards as a society is if people don't need to work because AI bots are doing most of the work and creating the production, delivering the services. So people don't need to work. UBI comes into play, universal basic income. But what does it mean for people and identity where they lack purpose? People identify their purpose today, oftentimes in their career, in their work. It would be nice to say, we'd all become artists and inventors. But there's another vision where people, if you remember the movie WALL-E, where people just kind of plug into the metaverse, drugged up on a sludge that we're all getting fat and playing video games all day. How do you see that playing out?
I still think it's down the line. I don't think it's in the near future. I do think it will happen, that there'll be widespread automation of jobs. Um, and we probably won't be prepared for it. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Our society has been geared to deal with certain things for so long, um, and when those changes happen, at least in the United States, we're not. I don't think we're prepared for it. So we have a hard time. We're not really good at reskilling or educating. Our education system has issues. Um, you know, but then again, if there's nothing to retrain for, then kind of you need that. So yeah, I do think people do have this sense that they want purpose in life. Um, but there are some people who don't. I know there's some wealthy people, trust fund babies or whatever, ski and have the time of their lives, and they just like to have fun. That's their part of the way they look at life, which is fine. There are other people that want to accomplish things outside of fun, um, and achieve things and be competitive. So I do think it kind of goes against, but I think ultimately when there's no jobs to be done, I think it does go against our nature and how we've evolved over time, where we are very competitive and we try to outdo everybody else and achieve certain things. And if that's gone, then I do think that creates a societal conundrum. I don't know what that means or how that impacts society, but it'll be a huge transit. It'll be a very difficult and wrenching transition, that's for sure.
Yeah. There are those who argue that a lot of the psychological diseases of today, anxiety, depression, are diseases of luxury, of privilege, right? Where people, we evolved to survive, and we spent our day, hunting, gathering, and fighting off saber-tooth tigers, and then now we have all this time on our hand to sit and ponder the existence and meaning of life, and that can lead to these types of existential questions and quandaries, or a crisis of meaning, or a crisis of purpose is a term that I've heard as well.
Yeah, I think it's very serious, and like I said, I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're near that at this point, but could be maybe 10 years.
Yeah. What about from a regulatory standpoint? Any thoughts on what's happened already? So England, I think, is one of the first to move forward with AI regulation. EU is typically takes a pretty restrictive stance, where it's guilty until proven innocent, where the US is usually on the opposite side, where
Yeah.
will allow harmful substances for way longer than they should have been allowed, until proven guilty or dangerous. So where do you see regulation coming in, and how can we balance allowing these technologies to develop while protecting against really cataclysmic effects of some of these disruptive technologies?
By the way, China has also implemented its own in fact, they're the first country to implement regulation of generative AI, especially for deepfakes, things like that. United States, we have some privacy laws. Different states have some privacy laws, but that's about the extent of the regulation here in the United States. We're a bit of cowboys, laissez-faire, until there's some huge crisis, and then we have regulation like Sarbanes-Oxley, or for the what happened after the late '90s with Enron and so forth. We had regulation after the financial crisis, after the Great Depression and the crash of the stock market. That created the Securities and Exchange Commission. So I would not hold my breath that we're going to get regulation anytime soon in the United States. The only thing that's different this time is that there is bipartisan support for it, because it's such a broad impact on society. or potentially a broad impact on society. It doesn't, for now at least, there doesn't seem to be a Democrat or Republican, liberal, conservative view on AI. Yeah, that could very well change, but so far it seems like that hasn't been the case. But I do think there usually needs to be some catalyst to make that happen, or else things just usually don't move in Congress. And we're going into election year too, so usually you don't want to rock the boat before election year. So I think it'd probably be some time until we get regulation in this country. I think it'll be mostly self-regulation from the big companies like Meta and Google and so forth.
And the cynical view is that these companies are pushing for regulation as a competitive moat. That the big guys always are benefiting from regulation because they help to write it and they make the barriers to entry higher for startups and people coming into the space.
Definitely, there's truth to that. Absolutely. And there's always the possibility of regulatory capture, where the special interests have all the money and resources to guide it certain directions.
That never happens in the US. Let's talk about quote unquote regular companies, right? So the average company is adopting these AI tools in their workflows to make them more efficient. So I'm not talking about, super high tech, startups that are led by engineering departments. I'm talking about your average company, the marketing team, maybe using tools like Jasper, things like that. Sales could be using, Dialpad or other tools. What do you see happening right now as companies are adopting AI? What do you recommend to companies that are thinking about adopting AI internally? And how do companies navigate that transition from a practical operational standpoint of implementing tools, but also from a risk and potentially ethics standpoint of like, what are the downsides? What do they need to watch out for?
Yeah. So good questions. The dilemma for companies today is that they know they need to do something. They just don't know what they need to do, or many of them. Talk about the regular companies, but they realize that they can't wait anymore. Customers are going to expect to be using these types of natural language processing systems and how they either work as an employee or interact with company as a partner or as a customer. So they understand that, and there's a move in that direction. So right now, I think it's just evaluating this technology, exploration, and maybe some experimentation. Like you said, part of this has already been done. I think some companies have used these products like Jasper. It's kind of more like point solutions. They're not handling important things like payroll or mission critical things that you pretty much need to get right. So marketing, if it hallucinates, that might be a good thing. So, but if it hallucinates with my paycheck, it's something your customer, you're going to hear about it. And maybe some regulatory, might get a letter from some regulatory agency in the process. So where I say you start is first looking at this technology and looking at what it's good at and what it's bad at. So, this technology is really good at creating sentences that sound human and creating content. It's also really good at summarization. And usually the summarization works pretty well because it's just focused on certain content that you present to it. That alone, the summarization alone is huge because all the content that we have to work with all throughout the day, that could just be a huge productivity gain for companies. So just in the summarization alone would be good. But, these models are limited because they're trained as of a certain date. So it's not real-time information. Unless you use something like a plugin or you train the system yourself, but that takes a lot of work. To create a plugin or a copilot or something like that. So, if you're looking for recent information or specific information, it's not going to it's not going to be it's going to lead you down the wrong road. So, if you were to use this as a customer facing system, be wary right now, because you don't want it to go off the rails and say certain things to your customers and lead them down a bad road. So I would start more. You mentioned the marketing. That's a great place to start. Um, you know, Maybe internally with summarization. You know, when I mean internally, working with your team and using these tools to summarize, what um, you know what happened with that meeting and the next steps for that meeting. And I think you can do some things on the customer side. For example, you could say, okay, I had this response from an email from my customer. Write a response that has, I know this person's really angry. Let's write a response that's, tries to de-escalate the situation in a very positive tone, a very helpful tone, and then take that and then see what we get, and then we can adjust it. But we get a couple benefits there. We save some time, and then we also, not all of us are, most people are not great writers either, or no, some people might have a little rough edge to them. So, they also get the benefit of creating some content that helps with that customer and calms that customer down and makes it so we don't lose that customer. So I think there's, a lot to do. I think it just gets overwhelming. So you just got to pick one area. It could be a small area, and just start, build your generative AI muscles from there and get some quick wins, and then expand on that. Don't boil the ocean and try to cure cancer and do everything all at once, and you're probably just going to get in some trouble. But figure out where this technology is useful, and then focus on a particular problem to solve.
Yeah, and just to remind, sometimes people think it's like this giant hurdle to adopt AI. If you've been using autocomplete or Grammarly, you've been adopting AI in your work anyway. So it's definitely an incremental process. What I've seen, and it could just be because of my bias, my perspective, that this is what I'm seeing most often. Of course, marketing, I'm very close to it, and there's so many interesting things that are happening there. And marketers generally, like you said, we hallucinate, so we're biased to these
That's
types
a
of
good
tools.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got that. You've got developers using tools like Copilot, which makes them, significantly more prolific in their ability to develop applications and code without, having to write out most of the perfunctory portions of the code and really just, focusing on what's unique about it. Sales and service are also some of the initial wedges that AI is being adopted, as you mentioned. Synthesis of information, right? Taking all of your sales calls and learning in a way that humans couldn't what works, what to upsell, when to pitch a specific product, et cetera. And on service as well, right? How to respond. You can automate a lot of that with AI chatbots, although a lot of them are really frustrating. As a user, you go to, you're looking for an answer and it just kind of gives you like this really bland list of links. But there are technologies now that are doing it much better, that are built on these language models that can synthesize a customer's, synthesize a company's internal knowledge base, as well as all customer service interactions, if they're recorded, and then use that to inform further interactions. So there's a lot of interesting kind of wedges into this for the average company. Any that I missed that you've seen popping up?
I think those are all great ones. I think those are all great places to start. And by the way, you mentioned Copilot for GitHub. It's my favorite app, bar none. It's changed my life. I mean, it really has. I've coded since I was, teenager, and it's like, wow. I mean, it just makes my life so much easier. It's great. It's great.
Yeah. So great transition, because we've been talking to Tom, the author, but you're also an engineer and an entrepreneur. So tell me about kind of your, well, let's get a quick recap of your journey. You've had a fascinating career, but also some of the lessons that you've learned as a founder, building and also exiting a couple of startups.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, Yeah, I've been a developer since high school. The old days where you actually had to write code and things like that. No internet, so I couldn't go to Stack Overflow to copy and paste code and things like that. And my first business I started was in the early '90s, developing software for the Windows platform uh, to help students with education, with exam preparation. So, and you know, in those days, there were no books about how to be an entrepreneur or how to start a tech company, or you just had to learn it. You just had to figure it out on your own. Um, and you just look at Bill Gates and say, well, he did it. So he was 18 years old, so I can do it. I'm 22, so I'm older, so I must know a little bit more than he did at that time. So, but there wasn't a lot to go with. But a lot of what I learned was just by osmosis and making mistakes along the way. But I think the one thing that was extremely helpful to me was I had a thesis. I didn't know what the word thesis meant, but at that time, but I did have a thesis, and that was from my experience while I was in college. And at that time, laptops were just starting to come out, be prevalent, and students would bring their laptops into class. And probably, I think most of the time they're just screwing around, playing games on them, things like that. But so there were students that are taking notes using their computer. And I thought, well, if these students, this can't be the only place. I'm sure there's colleges around the country where students are doing the same thing. So if students have these laptops and they're using that, partially to learn, well, maybe there's an opportunity to build software for those people. That was it. That was all. And I started a business off of that, and it worked out. I mean, I got customers, I got people interested in it, and it made progress. I had no capital. I mean, those days there wasn't a lot of venture capital. There's no, I didn't know what a seed round was or any of those things. I mean, this was so early on.
What year are we talking about?
So it was early '90s.
Yeah.
Early '90s. So pre-internet, 3 or 4 years before even Netscape came around. So, but that was it. And I could see it. I could just see a path where this would work, and there was a need in the market. So, I think the approach that gets you in trouble is you say, well, there's this cool technology called generative AI. So I'll use that. And but like for what? What's the vision for that technology? Jasper hit product market fit right on. I mean, they realized that marketers, you know, it's hard to write really good content. Copy. It's hard to write copy. It's hard to write these tweets. It's hard to do that at scale. But we have this, generative AI is just really good at that. It doesn't have to be even necessarily really accurate per se. I mean, if you feed it the information, to make it, to reduce that problem, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So, and they solved this problem. But I think that that vision or that thesis was that there's this problem out there, and there's this technology that can solve that problem. Really, that's just as simple as that. And it worked. So I think it's that thesis. What is your thesis? What is it that your way of looking at the world and where the world is going, and how your product is going to grow because of that? And that was it. That was it. And also, I learned, get an attorney. Don't do it on your own. Speaking of selling companies, first iteration, a lot of trouble because I didn't even have an attorney, so it was a big mess.
Yeah, you got burnt.
Yeah, it could have been a lot better. I mean, it wound up being okay, but it could have been a lot better. Second time around, I learned the lesson.
Got it.
Yeah,
very cool.
But yeah, I could pretty much go all day. We don't have all day, but those are just a few of the lessons I've learned. And also, I think the other thing to do is things usually just take longer than you think they will. just always do. I don't know why.
Yeah, that's a good advice for anybody. Raising capital or venture capital today or starting a company today is very different than, when you did in the early 90s and again in the late 90s. Any advice for founders today?
Yeah, so I didn't, for the first venture, I did not raise capital. It was sweat equity, I guess. Yeah, I just spent all day coding and
It's called bootstrap. That's what we call it
pretty
today.
much bootstrapping. That's what it was. Later ventures, I did raise venture capital. And clearly you need an attorney for that. So as advice for raising capital, the thesis and the vision is so important, and also the ability for storytelling. These investors see a lot of deals, and what is it that's going to make that deal stand out to that investor? What's going to get them excited? And you better be excited. Yeah, one thing I was excited. I was passionate. I mean, I sucked at exams. That was my thing. I sucked at it, but you know what? My computer, my software, it makes it so I can pass these exams now and actually do well on these exams. It shows where my weaknesses are, where I can work on my weaknesses. It shows how I'm progressing, and I think people picked up on that. That I love this. I love this product. I love what these computers can do and what software can do and how it can change your life. You got to have that. You just got to be really super excited about your product. If not, no one else is going to be that. No one else. So you better be something that you really truly believe in. If you don't, people are going to pick. Maybe in a couple years back when things were so crazy, maybe not. But today the environment is different. It's tougher to get funding. There's a lot more scrutiny of deals. But I think that passion, X factor is critical. But you also has to back it up on, some type of thesis that makes sense about where the market is going, why today, why your solution, and any proof points you can come up with to prove, to show you're on the right track. So those, it's not an easy thing, raising capital.
Sorry, and also to add to that, why you're the right team or individual to tackle that problem, right? Founder market fit is also a key component of that story.
Yeah, be careful picking your team. That was another bad lesson I learned early on. I had a big dispute with my partner, and the the way I picked my original partner was he just happened to be there, and I needed some help. That was it. That was the extent of. I mean, I knew him from. He was a high school friend, really good at basketball. Little did I know that that's pretty much all he was good at is basketball, and he didn't really like to work. So I was working nonstop, sleepless nights, coding all day long, and he was enjoying all the benefits of it. That did not make me too happy. So, it's really hard to find that team, and you're probably going to make some mistakes, but do a little bit more due diligence on that person, and if you can find a project to work on or something where you can work together before, that might be difficult, but definitely be very careful on who you bring on as your early team.
Yeah, such a good point. And I would add the vesting schedule helps with that.
Yes.
So having people earn their equity over time, so that they're providing value and they're not, you don't have what's called debt equity on your cap table for a founder that is no longer involved. I'm loving this, but we're running out of time here, and we typically close out with a exciting lightning round.
Okay.
So, if you will,
sure,
we'll move on to that.
Okay.
What's a book, newsletter, or podcast that you find yourself recommending most often?
Oh, well, what's a book? I read so many books; it's hard to keep track. I do like the Peter Thiel book. Can't remember the
0
name.
to 1.
Yeah, 0 to 1. I think it's a really good book. I do recommend that a lot. But that'd be a book I would recommend to entrepreneurs.
Cool. What about productivity hacks? You are writing, you're teaching, you're building courses, you're doing a lot of things. How do you stay focused and productive and prolific?
Well, ChatGPT has actually been really helpful to me. Um, you know, so you know, just simple stuff like for my book, my new generative AI book, to write a tweet about it. I just put the the content on the back of the book, put it in the ChatGPT, and I said write a tweet on how to promote the book, and actually came up with a good tweet with hashtags on there, just using ChatGPT. Like I mentioned, Copilot for GitHub, because I for these courses I do develop, create code for it. Um, it's really sped up the process quite a bit. Um, what else? Those are kind of the main things I've been doing. But yeah, the ChatGPT, even simple stuff, um, like there's something called JSON format. Let's put it in a format that computer can understand. Real tedious process. So easy to do in ChatGPT. Um, I put the data stream in there. I'll just say, put it in the JSON format. I tell it what the form looks like. Does it for me? I mean, that would take a long time. So yeah, I think my edge cases are kind of maybe particular to development, which may not for everybody.
No, but I think that I, for one, am using ChatGPT almost every day, and other AI tools as well to increase my efficiency. So, really good recommendations there. What's one thing you'd like to change about the startup or venture-backed startup world?
Oh, I think there's a serious issue with diversity for the investors side of things. um, you know, it's still very white, Ivy League, Stanford, very close knit in the VC community. Um, I think that needs to change. I think that there needs to be people from different backgrounds, and I think because AI is has these issues with bias and potentially discrimination and so forth. I think you know you know having different perspectives I think is important. And also, some of these returns on some of these VC funds have been just absolutely horrendous in the past couple of years. I would be surprised some of these funds have just almost zeros down the line, especially some of these early stage funds.
Yeah,
Um, so, yeah, there may need to be a bit of a reckoning and you know rethinking about who runs some of these funds.
absolutely. And the lack of diversity in the financing plays out in lack of diversity in the types of companies that are being funded. Even though that the data shows women-backed or female-led companies return higher profits to VCs on average than male-backed or male-led startups. Um, Last one. What's personal core value or principle that you try to live by?
Uh, that's a good question. I never really thought about thought about it.
Putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, definitely. But I think it's that pay it forward concept that there were people I ran into in my journey along the way that just helped me out, just to help me out. They didn't expect me to invoice them or give them shares, although in some cases I did ultimately, do that because I thought their advice was very valuable. But I do enjoy helping other people out, especially entrepreneurs, and I've done that a lot. I may not necessarily be an advisor or get equity for it, but just I felt like in the future, I should help out other entrepreneurs because people have helped me out without asking for anything, and I think that um, I would not have gotten to where I have, I would not have achieved what I have but for the help of all these people along the way. Yeah, it's just it makes it really very enjoyable, inspirational process. I would say.
Absolutely. Tom, I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for your time and sharing all of your insights and experience. If you can tell us, how can people reach you if they want to continue the conversation? Where can people find the book, and anything else you want to close us out with?
Yeah, so probably the best way to, well, I have a website, TOMTAULLI.com, my first and last name. There's a contact form on there if you want to reach me. And Twitter at TTAULLI. You can link with me on there and I can respond. And as for the book, you can, it's on Amazon, is probably the easiest way to buy it. And just put my last name, Taulli, Taulli, and generative AI, and that'll probably be the first thing that comes up.
Excellent. I'm going to put all those links in the show notes as always, so folks can access those easily. Thank you, Tom, and hope to stay in touch. Wishing you all the best.
You too as well.